My name is Sophie Anderson, and at 28, I thought I had finally built a life that had nothing to do with the man who threw me out with a suitcase and a trash bag when I was 18. But the day I walked into that will reading, he was already there, sitting at the polished table as if he still owned the world, grinning at me like nothing had happened. "This is good, kiddo," he said softly, just loud enough for me to hear. "Grandma's lodge is worth at least 1.36 million. We'll turn it into a real family business. Together." The word together hit me harder than any slap he'd ever given. He hadn't paid a cent toward my rent or food in 10 years. He hadn't called when I was sleeping on a friend's couch, working double shifts to stay in school. The only reason I was in that room was because of one person, my grandmother. Dorothy was the one who taught me how to scrub floors, not as punishment, but as pride. Who put cash in an envelope and called it emergency cookie money when she knew my bank account was at zero. Who looked me in the eye and said, "If he throws you away, I'll keep you." Weeks after her funeral, an official letter arrived, summoning me to the reading of her will. I knew she owned a mountain lodge. Our lodge, perched up on Willow Creek Mountain like a stubborn secret, but I never imagined it was worth over $1 million. I also never imagined the man who disowned me would show up acting like a loving father, already planning how to slice up her legacy. As the judge cleared his throat and flipped to the final page of the will, I felt a cold certainty settle in my chest. Whatever my grandmother had written in those lines, it wasn't going to be the family business my father thought. And when those words were read out loud, they would either save me or destroy me in front of the people who had already chosen to watch me fall. Before I tell you exactly what he said, and what I did the moment I walked out of that room, tell me, what time is it for you right now? And where are you listening from? I want to know just how far my grandmother's last wish will travel. The conference room felt too small for the amount of history crammed into it. The judge sat at the head of the table, papers neatly stacked in front of him, pen aligned with almost obsessive precision. On one side of the table sat my father, James Anderson, though I didn't think of him by his first name yet. Not out loud. My sister, and my mother. On the other side, me, and the lawyer my grandmother had trusted for years, Mr. Thompson. He adjusted his glasses, glanced over the top page, and gave me a brief nod, as if to say, "This will sting, but it's necessary." "We're here to formalize the last will and testament of Dorothy Anderson," the judge announced. "All parties present?" My father answered before anyone else. "Yes, Your Honor," he said smoothly. "We're eager to honor my mother's legacy as a united family." I almost laughed. United family. The last time I saw him before Grandma's funeral, he had been shouting at me to get out of his house, accusing me of being ungrateful, because I wouldn't drop college to work full-time for him. My mother, Linda, sat rigid, hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead at a point on the wall, as if eye contact might break something fragile inside her. My sister Hannah, perfectly dressed as always, reclined back in her chair like this was just another business meeting. Her eyes slid over me with a mixture of curiosity and contempt, as if she were evaluating a competitor rather than her younger sister. The judge nodded to Mr. Thompson. "You may proceed." Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Dorothy Anderson, being of sound mind and body at the time of signing, hereby declares this her final will and testament." Sound mind. Those two words were already loaded. I caught the tiny flicker in my father's jaw, the smallest twitch, like he'd just swallowed something bitter. He leaned toward Hannah and whispered, "We'll make sure that phrase doesn't stand." My stomach nodded. They'd come prepared with the script. Play the grieving family, praise Grandma's memory, then quietly argue she'd been confused, manipulated, too old to understand what she was doing. They weren't here to grieve, they were here to win. As Mr. Thompson read through minor bequests, Small sums to charities, sentimental items to distant cousins. I could feel my father's impatience rising like heat. His fingers tapped a silent rhythm on the table. Hannah checked her phone under the table, her screen lighting up, then dimming like a heartbeat. My mother flinched whenever either of them moved, but she said nothing. I listened, kept my face blank, and repeated one thought in my head like a shield. Grandma knew them. Grandma knew me. She didn't sign anything by accident. Still, one question pulsed under my skin. Why had the man who disowned me walked in so relaxed, so sure, as if all he had to do was show up and smile? If you were sitting where I was, across from the people who broke you, would you believe a single word about family coming out of their mouths? Mr. Thompson's voice shifted as he neared the section that mattered. Even the judge seemed to straighten in his chair, sensing we were finally approaching the heart of the conflict. Now, Mr. Thompson said, we come to the disposition of the primary asset. The mountain lodge located on Willow Creek Mountain, currently appraised at approximately $1,360,000. The number hung in the air like a chandelier about to drop. Hannah's posture snapped upright. My father's tapping stopped. My mother's eyes finally moved, from the wall to me. In respect to the lodge, Mr. Thompson continued, Mrs. Dorothy Anderson writes, this lodge is my life's work, my refuge, and my apology to my granddaughter. My throat tightened. Apology. She had never had to apologize to me for anything, but she knew someone else should have. I bequeath full operational control and beneficial interest of the lodge, Mr. Thompson read, to my granddaughter, Sophie Anderson, under the following conditions. My father exhaled in visible relief, smiling broadly, and placed his hand theatrically over his heart. That's wonderful, he said, already turning toward me. See? She wants you to have it. We'll help you run it, sweetheart. I'm not done, Mr. Thompson interjected sharply. The judge raised a hand for silence. My father's smile froze. Condition 1, Mr. Thompson went on. For a minimum period of 5 years from the date of this will being executed, the lodge shall not be sold, leased, mortgaged, or otherwise transferred without the explicit, written consent of Sophie Anderson. A muscle jumped in my father's cheek. Hannah's lips parted in disbelief. Condition 2. No family member, including but not limited to my son, James Anderson, my daughter-in-law, Linda Anderson, or my granddaughter, Hannah Anderson, shall exercise managerial authority, hold controlling interest, or issue binding decisions on the lodge's operations without the express written approval of Sophie Anderson. Silence collapsed over the room. My father broke it with a bitter laugh. She's joking, he muttered. She must be joking. Mr. Thompson looked up, expression neutral. Condition 3, he said, voice even. Should any family member attempt to contest this will, challenge Sophie Anderson's authority, or undermine the operational independence granted herein, the lodge shall be immediately transferred in its entirety to the charity Haven for Youth, and no member of the Anderson family shall receive any ownership, profits, or rights related to the property. Hannah actually gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. My mother shut her eyes as if bracing for impact. My father went very, very still. His eyes darkened, and for the first time, the confident mask slipped. That's insane, he snapped. My mother loved this family. She wouldn't threaten to give away everything to strangers just because of some childish language. Mr. Thompson calmly slid a document forward. This clause was drafted by Mrs. Anderson herself, in my presence, and reviewed multiple times. She was entirely lucid every single time, James. I stared at the page. My grandmother's signature was there, looping and firm, beneath a paragraph that read like a grenade aimed straight at my father's greed. If he pushed too hard, if he tried to grab what he wanted, he wouldn't just lose. We all would. And she had trusted me to hold that line. Anger flared in my father's voice. Or she was manipulated, he growled. People get confused when they're old. She was talking nonsense at the end. I heard it myself. You visited twice in 3 years, I said quietly. Every eye turned to me. You heard whatever was convenient for you to hear. For a moment, our gazes locked, and the history between us pressed down on the table like another stack of legal papers. The night he told me I could either obey him or get out, the way our hallway had echoed when the front door slammed behind me, the silence that followed for 10 whole years. I realized then that Grandma's clause wasn't just revenge, it was a test. Would I protect what she gave me, even if it meant burning what was left of my family? And if you were in my place, holding a legacy that could vanish at the first sign of weakness, would you risk losing everything to stop the people who already threw you away once? The formal reading ended, but the real battle started the moment we stepped out into the corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile brightness that made every expression too sharp, every lie too obvious. Hannah stormed ahead, heels clicking like gunshots. My mother lingered behind the group, clutching her handbag as if she could disappear inside it. My father blocked my path, planting himself in the middle of the hallway with the practiced ease of a man who'd been intimidating people his whole life. We need to talk, he said. His voice was low, but not low enough that Hannah and Linda couldn't hear. About reality. I folded my arms. Reality is a signed will, and a judge who just heard it. His smile was tight, lips stretched without warmth. Reality is that you have no idea how to run a multi-million-dollar property. You've never managed staff, marketing, bookings, maintenance. You're a sentimental kid with a guilt complex. You will drown in responsibility. Good thing I learned to swim when you threw me out, I replied. His eyes flashed. Don't start with that drama. You were rebellious. You refused to work in the business. You chose to leave. I remembered the way he'd stood over me in the doorway 10 years ago, shouting that I could take my attitude somewhere else and see how far that degree gets you when you're starving. Funny how, in his version, I had simply chosen to leave. You disowned me, I said steadily. You told me I wasn't your daughter anymore. His jaw tightened. Words said in anger, he muttered. You know how family fights go, but this... He gestured toward the conference room. This is generational wealth, Sophie. Bigger than old arguments. Your grandmother wanted all of us to benefit. She was confused, manipulated, whatever. We can fix this. We work together, adjust a few things, make you a public face, and everyone wins. Everyone? I asked. Or just you? Hannah spun back toward us, eyes blazing. This isn't complicated, she snapped. You sign some papers, give Dad and me equal say, and we turn the lodge into a luxury resort. We already have people interested, investors. You think your little memories with Grandma are worth more than that? Those memories built the lodge, I shot back. While you two were ignoring her calls, I was learning every creaking floorboard, every guest story. She didn't leave me a cash machine. She left me a home. My father stepped closer, dropping his voice even lower. Listen carefully, Sophie. If you try to go at this alone, you will fail. Bookings will dry up, maintenance will bankrupt you, and when you finally crawl back, it will be too late. You'll have lost your chance at being part of this family again. Is that really what you want? For a second, the old fear tried to crawl back into my bones. The fear of being alone, of not having a safety net, of nights spent counting the last bills in my wallet. But then I remembered who had actually kept me alive. It wasn't the man in front of me, it was the woman whose signature was now protecting me from him. I already lost this family, I said. The day you threw me out, you made that choice for both of us. Grandma gave me a second chance not to crawl back, but to build something that's finally mine. His face hardened. The charm evaporated, replaced by raw anger. "You're making a mistake you can't fix," he hissed. "You think some charity clause scares me? You think I won't fight?" "I think," I replied. "That's exactly what she was counting on." For a heartbeat, we stood in a standoff. His threat, my defiance, my mother's quiet sob behind him, Hannah's impatient scoff. Then he leaned in, almost nose to nose. "If you turn this into a war," he said, "don't cry when you lose everything. Not just the lodge, your reputation, your future, all of it." He walked away, Hannah at his side, their silhouettes receding down the corridor like a warning. My mother lingered, eyes wet, lips trembling, but when she opened her mouth, no words came out. She just gave me one broken look and followed them. I stood there alone, pulse pounding in my ears, the echo of my father's threat looping in my head. Would you call that a warning from a parent, or a declaration of war from a man who couldn't stand losing control? I drove up to Willow Creek Mountain that evening with my car packed full of boxes and my mind packed full of defiance. The lodge rose out of the trees as I rounded the last bend, familiar and wild at the same time. The wood siding that Grandma had insisted on maintaining every spring was weathered but strong, like her. The front porch sagged slightly, but the view of the valley stretched out in a way that made your problems look small. I took a deep breath and unlocked the door with the key that was now legally mine. The air inside smelled like pine cleaner and old coffee. It should have felt like a burden. Instead, it felt like an answer. I didn't start with spreadsheets or profit forecasts. I started with a corkboard. I pinned up photos, families laughing around the fire pit, kids tearing across the lawn, couples watching sunsets from the balcony. On blank note cards, I wrote words Grandma had said. "People don't come here for perfection. They come here to remember they're still alive." Then I sketched plans. Themed weekends for families, corporate retreats focused on reconnection, off-season packages to keep the lodge busy year-round. Revenge wasn't going to be me screaming at my father. Revenge would be fully booked rooms and a waiting list. "So this is the war room," Mark said when he walked in. He'd been my friend since college, the one who once paid my phone bill from his own grocery money because he was tired of your number being disconnected every other month. He leaned against the doorway, taking in the board covered with photos, maps, and plans. "It's very you. Organized chaos with passive-aggressive, inspirational quotes." I laughed for the first time that day. "Grandma left me the lodge," I told him, "and a nuclear clause that sends it to charity if anyone contests it." My father is already vibrating with rage. He's coming. I just don't know when. "Then we make this place so solid," Mark said, "that when he comes, he runs headfirst into a wall made of fully booked calendars and glowing reviews." We got to work. We hired local contractors to fix the roof, update the plumbing, and freshen up the rooms without erasing their character. I turned one storage room into a small library with board games and children's books. Mark helped set up a bare-bones website, then convinced me to film a shaky video tour on my phone, talking about Grandma's lodge and what I wanted to create in her honor. Within weeks, the first bookings trickled in. A couple celebrating their anniversary, a family reunion, a group of old friends escaping the city. Guests left notes in the comment book about how peaceful they felt, how the place reminded them of childhood. Every good review felt like another brick in the wall between my father and what he wanted. Of course, he didn't sit quietly. Rumors started circulating in town that I was out of my depth, that the lodge was unsafe, that Grandma had been confused when she changed her will. I overheard someone in the grocery store saying, "James is just trying to protect what's rightfully his. That girl barely knows how to run her own life." I pretended not to hear, but later that night, it hit me like a delayed punch. Sitting on the porch with Mark watching the last guest car taillights disappear down the mountain road, I confessed. What if he's right? What if I crash this place into the ground and prove him right about me? Mark didn't look away from the horizon. He disowned you because you wouldn't be his employee, he said. Now he's pissed because you're not his subordinate in this either. Failure would prove him right. Success will drive him insane. Which do you prefer? I thought of my father's face when he heard the charity clause, the way his confidence cracked. I thought of Grandma's signature under those impossible conditions. Success, I said. Good, Mark replied. Then every time you're tempted to doubt yourself, ask one question. Are you going to let the man who threw you out decide what you're capable of? Success came, slowly but undeniably. Within a few months, weekend bookings were full. Photos of the lodge started appearing on social media, tagged with captions like "hidden gem" and "feels like visiting your favorite grandparent but with better Wi-Fi." I should have been able to relax. Instead, the tension simply changed shape. One afternoon, I was in the office reviewing invoices when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Ms. Anderson?" a crisp voice asked. "This is Attorney Collins, representing James and Hannah Anderson." I didn't need to sit down to know I should. "Go on," I said. "Your father and sister have serious concerns about the circumstances under which your grandmother's will was executed," he continued. "They believe she was unduly influenced and that her mental capacity was compromised." "They were barely around," I replied. "How would they know her mental state?" "That's precisely why we intend to bring it before the court," he said. "We're filing a petition to contest the will and request an emergency hearing regarding the lodge." When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from surprise, but from confirmation. The war had officially begun. I called Mark, and he arrived at the lodge within the hour, laptop under his arm, expression grim. "We knew this was coming," he said. "We didn't know when, now we do. So we build our case." Our days split into two timelines. In one, I was the lodge owner, welcoming guests, fixing broken light fixtures, taste testing new menu ideas, laughing with kids in the yard. In the other, I was a strategist, combing through Grandma's medical records, collecting written statements from her doctor, tracking down longtime guests who'd spent time with her in her final year. Mr. Thompson helped us assemble everything. Dorothy anticipated this, he said during one late-night meeting in his office. That's why she insisted on video recording the day she signed the final version of the will. On the screen, my grandmother appeared, hair thinner, cheeks more sunken than I remembered, but eyes sharp and amused. "If my son ever tries to say I didn't know what I was doing," she told the camera, "you tell him I've known exactly what he's doing since he was 16 and learned to lie with a straight face." I laughed through tears as I watched. There she was, calling out his tactics from beyond the grave. Meanwhile, in town, my father played a different version of events. He took my mother and sister to community gatherings, church events, business meetups, telling anyone who would listen that he was heartbroken over how things had turned out. "Mom was confused," he'd say, shaking his head sadly. "She loved all of us, but somehow that lawyer twisted her words. Now Sophie's being used. We just want to bring the lodge back into the family where it belongs." Some people believed him, others didn't. I could see the split in the way neighbors greeted me, some warmly, some with tight smiles and whispered conversations as soon as I walked past. The emotional toll was heavy. There were nights I lay awake in one of the guest rooms, staring at the ceiling, imagining every possible outcome. The lodge being taken from me, my father celebrating a legal victory, Grandma's legacy reduced to a business asset on a spreadsheet. One night, close to midnight, I went down to the kitchen and found my mother sitting at the table in the dark. She startled when I turned on the light. "I couldn't sleep," she said quietly. "James is very determined." "I noticed," I said. She looked older than I remembered, lines carved deep around her eyes. He's borrowed money, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. He promised investors that once the will is corrected, the lodge will be collateral for a new project. If he loses this case, she didn't finish the sentence. I understood anyway. If he lost, it wouldn't just be pride, it would be financial ruin. For a moment, guilt pierced through my anger. Then I remembered all the times she had watched him crush me and said nothing. He chose this, I said. He chose to bet on taking what Grandma didn't want him to have. She looked at me with a mix of sorrow and something like envy. You sound like her, she said. She never backed down either. I poured myself some water and leaned against the counter. Mom, I asked, do you believe she knew what she was doing when she wrote that will? My mother stared at the table for a long time. Then slowly, she nodded. Yes, she whispered. She knew exactly what she was doing. Would you say that under oath? I asked. She flinched. I don't know. She stood abruptly, grabbed her coat, and left without another word. As the door closed, I realized something. This wasn't just about facts. It was about who had the courage to say them out loud. When you've lived your whole life under someone else's control, how easy would it be to finally tell the truth, knowing it might help break them? The day of the emergency hearing dawned gray and cold, like the sky knew what was coming. I wore the simplest thing I owned, a black dress, a blazer, and the old silver necklace Grandma had given me when I turned 16. Mark drove me to the courthouse, his hands steady on the wheel. Remember, he said, this isn't about proving you're perfect. It's about proving you're the one she trusted, and that she had every right to. Inside the courtroom, everything felt too bright, too exposed. My father sat at the plaintiff's table in an expensive suit, looking like a man who had walked into a negotiation he expected to win. Hannah sat beside him, scrolling through her phone, while their lawyer arranged folders in a neat stack. My mother sat behind them, eyes fixed on the floor. On our side, it was just me, Mr. Thompson, and Mark in the first row behind us. The judge, the same one from the reading, called the session to order. We are here to consider the petition filed by James and Hannah Anderson to contest the will of Dorothy Anderson, specifically regarding the disposition of the Willow Creek Mountain Lodge. My father's lawyer began with a smooth, rehearsed speech. He painted Grandma as a confused old woman, deeply attached to her granddaughter, but no longer fully capable of complex financial decisions. He described me as emotionally vulnerable and easily influenced, implying that Mr. Thompson and I had guided her into cutting out the rest of the family. My jaw clenched, but I stayed silent. When he called my father to the stand, James put on a performance worthy of an award. He talked about working day and night to provide for the family, about his heartbreak when I distanced myself, about his shock upon discovering that his mother had been turned against him in her final days. He even dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. If I hadn't known him, I might have believed him, Mr. Thompson's turn was quieter, less dramatic. He presented dates, documents, medical evaluations showing Grandma's mental clarity, emails where she had laid out her intentions for the lodge long before her health declined. Then he looked at me. We call Sophie Anderson to the stand. My legs felt heavy as I walked up, but as soon as I sat and placed my hand on the Bible, something steadied inside me. I told the truth. I described the years I spent at the lodge with Grandma, the nights we'd sat on the balcony, her telling me stories about how she'd built the place from nothing. I talked about the way she winced when my father pressured her to expand aggressively, to take on debt she didn't want. I repeated her words about the will. If your father wants the lodge, he'll have to want you first. And if he can't do that, he gets nothing. My father's lawyer cross-examined me, trying to paint me as bitter, vengeful, out for payback. Isn't it true, he asked, that you have unresolved anger toward your father for disowning you? Of course I do, I said calmly. But my anger didn't write the will. My grandmother did. And isn't it possible, he pressed, that your grandmother, out of guilt or confusion, overcorrected and gave you more authority than she really intended? No, I said. It's possible my father underestimated how clearly she saw him. A small murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge rapped his gavel lightly. Order. When Mr. Thompson called our final witness, my father's confidence visibly wavered. The defense calls Linda Anderson, he announced. My mother looked like she might faint. For a moment I thought she would refuse. Then, slowly, she stood and walked to the stand, each step an act of rebellion against the man she'd stood beside for decades. Mrs. Anderson, Mr. Thompson said gently, you were present for many conversations between your mother-in-law and the family. In your own words, can you tell the court what you observed about her mental state when she discussed her will? My mother's hands trembled in her lap. She glanced at my father. His expression was a barely contained threat. She looked at me. I didn't plead with her. I just let her see the question in my eyes. Who do you want to be today? Dorothy was stubborn, my mother began. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. She was clear about what she wanted even when we didn't like it. She knew numbers, dates, details. She remembered things from years ago. She wasn't confused. My father's lawyer stood. Objection, Your Honor. Overruled, the judge said. Continue, Mrs. Anderson. My mother swallowed. She told me, more than once, that she was leaving the lodge to Sophie to manage. She said James would never treat it as anything more than a business. She didn't trust him with it. The words hit like a hammer. My father's face flushed deep red. Linda, he hissed under his breath, but the microphone picked it up. What are you doing? She flinched but went on. Dorothy was not manipulated, she said. She was trying to protect what she built. And she believed Sophie would protect it too. For the first time, my father looked genuinely shocked, not because of the legal implications, but because the woman who had followed his lead for years had stepped out of his shadow. The rest of the hearing moved in a blur. The video of Grandma speaking to the camera, the doctor's testimony, financial records showing my father's recent risky investments based on anticipated access to lodge equity. Mr. Thompson didn't just defend the will, he exposed my father's motive. When closing arguments ended, the judge took a long pause, reviewing his notes. The room felt so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Finally, he spoke. The evidence presented shows that Dorothy Anderson was of sound mind at the time she executed her will, he said. Her intentions are clear, consistent, and corroborated by multiple witnesses and documentation. My father's shoulders tensed. His lawyer stared straight ahead. Therefore, the judge continued, the petition to contest the will is denied. The will stands as written. Operational control of the lodge remains with Sophie Anderson under the conditions specified. Relief crashed over me like a wave. I almost didn't hear the next part. Furthermore, given the frivolous and self-serving nature of the challenge and the clear financial motives behind it, court costs and attorney fees are to be paid by the plaintiffs, James and Hannah Anderson. A stunned silence followed. My father's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Hannah turned to him in horror. Dad, she whispered, we don't have that kind of... She stopped when she saw my expression. Not gloating, not smug, just done. Later, I would learn the full extent of it. The investors he'd promised access to the lodge, the loans he'd taken expecting to refinance using the property as collateral. The court's decision didn't just cost him legal fees, it triggered clauses in his agreements. Within months, he sold off assets he'd spent years bragging about: cars, a vacation condo, pieces of the very business he'd once claimed I was ungrateful for not joining. In the end, it wasn't me who destroyed his legacy. It was his own greed, bouncing back with interest. Outside the courthouse, my mother approached me slowly. "I'm sorry," she said, "for a lot of things." I nodded. "Thank you for telling the truth," I replied. "That was yours to give, not mine to demand." She nodded, eyes wet, and for once she didn't follow my father. She walked away alone. Mark came up beside me, grinning. "Well," he said, "you just watched karma work in real time." I looked up at the gray sky, felt the cold air fill my lungs, and thought of Grandma. "No," I said quietly. I watched my grandmother's faith in me win. Months later, the lodge was busier than ever. Families came and went, laughter echoing in the hallways, just like she'd wanted. Sometimes, when I stood on the balcony at sunset, I imagined her beside me, arms crossed, eyes sparkling. "You did it," I murmured. "You made sure he couldn't turn me into collateral." The revenge hadn't been dramatic screaming or some cinematic takedown. It had been slower, sharper. Success he couldn't control, truth he couldn't rewrite, consequences he couldn't dodge. But as I watched kids chase each other across the lawn and couples hold hands by the fire, another question surfaced, quieter, more complicated. When justice finally lands and the person who hurt you pays a price they chose to risk, what do you do with the part of you that still wishes they'd simply chosen to be better instead?